then Tambo Chong, the young Dava Junior, San Jen Tangi, Song Ji, Hong Tover Zigu, Te Chedo, Tatanga, Tambo Chu Samu Nyamba Yen Sam.
Yet again, it is at first, before we start, important to make sure that we have the right motivation while listening to these profound Dharma instructions. And the right motivation should of course be one that allows us to listen to these instructions and implement these instructions, not only for our own sakes, but for the sake of all sentient beings, coupled with the wish that eventually we'll be able to establish all of these beings in the full enlightenment of Buddha.
Then Gemo get you. Tendrizi, he na, then Dawa Mahiva, Koroyo Kaja, then Dunga Roji, Yawa to Yata. Dunga Roji, Hine Kayana, Sana, and the Master.
Generally speaking, when listening to Dharma instructions, we should do so with a joyful mind, with a joyful attitude, rather than thinking he's going on yet again about the hell rums and hungry ghosts and all that lot, so all that suffering going on all the time. So we should not despair of such teachings, but listen joyfully.
Then it do the Balamon Trupa and the Orawa. Then it came Kova, Chipare, so on. Kovala, Chimayang, Jamsu, Chong, Kovaga, Tala, Targamare, Tartumare, and thanks Sabo Yor and Kovat. Then in Kovan on the Nina, then it don't want the Balaptapa, Younger, or Taylor Payard.
As we've heard yesterday in the first two lines of the first verse of our text of our teachers, it was said that the waves of the great ocean of suffering within the three realms are extremely agitated. So the analogy of the ocean and the waves, which all too often crash about on its surface, is being used. This is nothing else but an analogy for the immense ocean, the immense vastness of the cycle of existence that's commonly known as samsara. Just as an ocean is extremely vast and extremely deep, so is this cycle of existence. And just as one can sink very deeply within an ocean, one can also sink very deeply within the cycle of existence that we know as samsara. And no matter how one looks at it, there constantly is some agitation caused by sufferings, caused by sorrow, etc. going on within this cycle of existence. Therefore, the analogy of samsara compared to an ocean and the waves that crash about on it is very fitting.
Tatangaro Lunditan, Dombichu Yang Tabashi Drip. Then call it Tarachi, good, Tendi Tabacharo, Teruchi, Te Trembeke, Chido, then call it Domante, somebody.
Now, all of that being the case, we'd be well advised to occasionally consider all the suffering that is going on in this, within this world of ours, within the various realms of existence. Even though possibly we might not experience any suffering, we might be physically well, we might enjoy the company of friends, etc., and have no suffering to speak of at all at the moment. If one looks at it dispassionately, if one looks at it closely, one will see that truly there is no such thing as lasting happiness within this cycle of existence, within this world. There is simply no such a thing to be found. Therefore, if we were to consider various ways of becoming lastingly free of such suffering, it would be a very useful, a very helpful contemplation, particularly in our present situation as we have achieved a precious human rebirth. This possibility is within our reach, within our grasp, and therefore it would make great sense that we make use of this great opportunity that we presently have at our disposal. Now, if one were to consider all of these points, then it indeed makes great sense to consider the indisputable fact of suffering. And for that reason, for that sole reason, Rinpoche is bringing up all of these points in the first place.
Gedong me ge laso sa ji le ne pa ren jong song wa ta nga ru jewan da la dewa sa pa jewan da la de pa se pa ta ti gen je ba ta la tin dong ma man ra wa nyong wa re.
If we were to consider the sufferings of the lower realms, like the suffering of the hell beings, the sufferings of the hungry ghosts, etc., then it becomes obvious that in these realms, suffering without any interruption, without any let-up, is constantly being experienced. Whereas, on the other hand, in our human existence, our existence is characterized by lots of ups and downs. At times there is lots of suffering, at other times there is no suffering, and it's always going up and down this way. So it comes and goes in waves, so to speak, and occasionally there is some let-up that gives us time to breathe, gives us time to relax. If we were to think about what the cause of such suffering is, either the constant suffering in lower realms or the ups and downs of more or less suffering in our human realm, then Atisha says in his text in the next two lines of the first verse, that all of such suffering, all of such experiencing more or less of suffering, surely is being brought about through virtuous and non-virtuous deeds. They are at the root of that which we experience. In particular, it can be said that the experience of the sufferings of the hell realms, or rebirth in the hell realms, is being brought about as a result of great anger and hatred. Rebirth and the corresponding sufferings in the hungry ghost realm are being brought about through the emotional defilements of great desire or covetousness. Then there are those who find themselves under the influence of great stupidity, great ignorance, who either do not want to or who are not able to see, to appreciate the simple truths of the qualities of the enlightened beings such as the Buddha, and not even the inevitable truth of the law of cause and effect, to have no regard for cause and effect in any which way whatsoever. Such defilement, such emotional defilement usually leads to rebirth in the animal realm. Now again, desire and covetousness have a very close connection, and they also cause the various sufferings that are being experienced within the human realm, particularly these four predominant sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death. If one should find oneself predominantly under the influence of the emotional defilement of pride, this is what brings about the rebirth in one or the other of the God realms. It is that emotional defilement which leads us to believe that we ourselves are the greatest, we ourselves are the best, and on the basis of such an erroneous view about oneself, one actively causes others harm. And this then eventually leads results in the predominant suffering of the God realm, which is that of having to leave the God realm and falling down from that particular existence again into a lower one. Then eventually, if we should find ourselves predominantly under the influence of jealousy of whatever kind, that will directly lead to the experience of the suffering of the asuras or the non-gods, which is predominantly one of strife and constant fight. Of all of these emotional defilements, the very worst one is that of anger or hatred. As it has been said by the great master Shantideva, just she was right? Shantideva, there is no greater non-virtue than anger, and there is no greater virtue than patience. So where does all of that anger come from? It comes from being angry, which means to say that anger is nothing else but an emotional defilement that is being produced within our own minds. Just to give an example, if two people were to come together, and all of a sudden one would start out by way of being friendly, smiling, asking the other in a friendly way, how are you, how have you been, how is it going, and the other one would respond in kind, then we find ourselves all together in a friendly situation which doesn't give rise to any anger whatsoever. In this way we could deal with each other in a friendly way, and anger would just not arise. Now imagine the other situation. Again, two people come together, but the one completely ignores the other, looks the other way, doesn't put on a friendly face at all, and the second person then tries maybe even to approach that person from the other side, and yet again the face is being turned away, the person is being ignored. Then the second person will invariably eventually think, well, such and such person truly does not like me. Now why on earth doesn't he, or she for that matter, not like me? And then there is a good chance that in such a person some sort of anger will start to arise. Such a situation happening will invariably lead to these two people to stick with the example, again meeting in the future, again treating each other in the very same way. This idea of the other person dislikes me will just stay stuck in their minds, for the most part, in both of their minds. And again, whenever they meet again, the same awkward situation will occur. The benefit of such a situation is exactly none whatsoever. Yet the potential for anger, for being cross with each other is there. It is inherently there in that situation for no reason whatsoever.
Drime samba tiga meta tapna so going kale tela hiwatin tapshitena di meta ngaru dropo tamchi no chudu jobatin regiri
so teaching no kana
dahi never song ngara never thinking dai never song tarje joba long jondo tela tapji taina nzahi je dangma 대연도 된다 매요나 담보 두번 다 대신 말로서 세는 캔여 같은 리에나 되니 pen 장통산 잡아 사공 잡아 되니 제가 안로 되니 계자지 시 되니 자야부 통 고비야부 세통 딩공 대시래요 그래서 고비야부 가려와 되니 고비 갑중중 지나 고비 가본 다때다왔지네. 되니 메텔라 계자님보시. 되니 지나 되니 디셰동가 초바데 니가 양로래. 몸발한테 로봇 탐지는 초도 저한테 레디오래 송. 거기도 지야 남주지. 그래서 거기를 따라와. 거기가 좀좀마도 요 말인데 얘한테 뱀이 오래.
아장 좋아
뱀이 오래.
Yeah, such is the situation occasionally. First, a word by the great Nyingma master Palter Rinpoche, who concerning these points has said that whoever appears as my enemy, whoever seems to wish me harm, is nothing else but the coming together of various circumstances. Employing skillful means, I can make such a person into the very best of my friends. And this is exactly what is to be done, what is to be implemented in such a situation. As Rinpoche has demonstrated, he has greatly studied the various rituals that are being employed in such situations, and he advises us to try them out for ourselves. If there is such a person with whom we are cross, or with whom we have just the idea that the person possibly dislikes us, or whatever it might be, then why not try to get together with such a person? Particularly in our culture, there is the ritual of inviting each other out for a cup of coffee or for a meal or something like this, but it doesn't really take much. A cup of coffee is very much sufficient. Just go to that person and say to such a person, like, why shouldn't we go and have a cup of coffee together? Why don't we go to some nice place, sit down together, have a chat over a good cup of coffee, and see what happens. We go there, we have ourselves that coffee, we enjoy that coffee together, or a cup of tea for that matter, whatever people prefer. And this greatly diffuses the situation, this greatly relaxes the situation. All of a sudden, one might recognize that there actually is no bone of contention whatsoever, and all of a sudden we're the best friends again. So this is something that is to be implemented again, just that simple ritual of enjoying something together, be it a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever, often helps a great deal to diffuse and to pacify a potentially difficult situation.
Yenanyang, Zong Chubai Chonayang, Tu Gendo, then in Zawatan Sambagon, Jedo Zang, Jekijala, Shadanga, Topa, Michi, Tendawa Seguri, Tendawa Yendu, that Chu, that Meta, Lapsoma, then Mom Pala Charon, Tenga, younger, Tendi Yung, Tea Kablangaranga, Tendi Laps on Song, then Shadanka Topa, Desima Chong Tang, then Sem Shavala, Yacht, that is Segura, chewing, Nimbo to Tenda.
Invariably, we'll find ourselves again and again in such situations, be it within the family, or be it while meeting friends or colleagues or acquaintances of whatever sort. Again and again, there will be situations which bear the potential of trouble, of suffering, of anger for that matter. And exactly in these situations, no matter who it is that we are confronted with, exactly in these situations, it is of great importance that we remind ourselves of these simple means of diffusing the situation, of making a potentially difficult situation into a positive one. Now, that's all very easily said as we sit here and listen to the words as Rinpoche speaks them. It's Rinpoche's wish and hope that once we're out there again in the real life, and once we're confronted again with such potential situations and such people who might give rise to anger or whatever sort of thing within us, that we then actually remember these words, and that we, to the best of our ability, try to implement them, try to actually practice that which we have heard, and make it into a living experience.
And two don't know about Naranga, Sana, Naranga, Taki Tang. Semdala, Yamu, Toba Younger, Domo, Mundu. Naruga Semdala, giving Toba Younger, Domo, Mundu, then there are two Jandu, and Taki Tang. Then the Bama gave out a Toba Younger, the Ponzai in San, Panza Katala, Pang Taku.
In whatever situation we may find ourselves in our lives, it is of great importance that we begin to learn to examine our own mental setup, in whichever situation we may find ourselves, that we're able at least to determine what it is that motivates us at any given moment, whether it is genuinely altruistic motivation that is at the bottom of our activities, or whether we wish harm to others. If the latter should be the case, then it goes without saying that we have to remind ourselves that a harmful attitude brings about not only suffering for others, but eventually also suffering for ourselves. And therefore, such attitudes which in any way are harmful for others and ourselves, they are that which is to be abandoned. Therefore, we should learn to examine ourselves in any given moment, and to be in the clear about what it is that is our underlying driving force or motivation at any given moment.
Tati dunga mandra mumbo yungwate jo kandri tsene ki yungwandona tene jo ngaron tsongka sana nye mumbanda choshka dong tam ngaja chadong ngagi tene le sa ne jo tela tene dunga tangji de jega yore tante songwate.
Nyemong korangi ju tengirwa?
Nyemong korangi ngaron tsong sana 대변은 야베기 동안용으로와 야베 동안용고 정칭이 디 용만 부르고 샘때라 예 뭔가 쇼청보 디밤에가 뭔가 사고도와 그래서 되는 좋대라 되는 동안.
Now, whatever situation we might find ourselves in, again we might wonder, how did this situation come about in the first place? Whether we find ourselves under the influence of the one or the other emotional defilement, whether we find ourselves in difficult situations with others and we seem to be able to only react in such and such a particular way which bears the potential for more trouble, etc. If we think about it dispassionately, we might want to get to the bottom of what is the root cause of all of this. Where does all of this come from in the first place? And it is our teacher who points out that the very cause for all of these various situations and the reactions that we give rise to during such situations is nothing other but our own emotional defilements. Certain things happen within our lives, and we seem to think that we have to react in this particular way, and there is no other way to go about it. This is what what Atisha points out when he says that attachment, aversion, etc., all of these various experiences are caused by none other but the emotional defilements within ourselves, the various ways in which we seem to think that we have to react, which we are trained to, which we have made our second nature without ever thinking about them in the first place. To clarify, one could also point out that Atisha, by way of saying so, he points out that all of these ways of reacting, all of these ways of behavior, the various situations that appear, etc., that they all cause each other, that there is an interdependence to all of these.
Semla, Turaka, Wangi, Da Tang, Yin, Niso Zongan. Da Yin is a Zong Tadu, Dog Sola, the Charton, Majala, so Toba Jewatan, Yin Sola, then a Chado, Shadang Lasso, Toba Jewasine. Tatiga Pala, Da Yin is somebody, Marik Pala, Tini, Tatendrawa Yungu.
근데 이동당 이용과대 단타 되자 세단가대 공수도 봐요.
예동 홍동 몽 나가르 니 요데 나랑 빼 야본도 지보도 땡가랑 그거도 근데 대시 세단 깨베 요래 예동 말이 땡가라 그거도 제출 당도 제 파빵 되는 자라 빵랑 오 예동 홍동 서로 그 열탐지다. 서로 열탐지. 가시제라 나를 가기도 되게 동안이. 가시제라 나는 가기도 되게 동안이. 다 된다와. 니선 좀 봐라. 때는 냐모가 똑같지.
Now, all of these emotional defilements under the influence of which we occasionally find ourselves have in turn in themselves a cause. They are caused by something. And the something that they're caused by is this erroneous idea of there being a self, which logically gives rise to the idea of there being something other than the self. This dualism and this clinging to this dualism is what is the root cause for all of the other emotional defilements under the influence of which we find ourselves, and we find ourselves acting in any given moment in any given situation. There is this wrong idea that there is a self, and this mostly expresses itself by way of wanting to have good things for oneself, thinking of oneself as being great, as being wonderful, as being an altogether wholesome person, whereas everything other than this self, everything other than ourselves is something different, is potentially dangerous, is to be rejected, is something that causes ourselves all sorts of trouble or aversion, etc. On the basis of this wrong belief, of this erroneous idea, all of the other emotional defilements and the directions, the reactions they give rise to appear in the first place. This is what Atisha means to point out when he says in the next 3 lines of the next verse, where he says, the cause for their arising, the emotional defilements, is in turn the grasping at the duality of things as pleasant or unpleasant, etc. So there is the opportunity now for some questions, should there be